You are born into a world with no doctors, no hospitals, no medicine, no machines to help you breathe or see or hear, no wheelchairs, no glasses, no safety net of any kind. And you are born different. Maybe your eyes don't work. Maybe you live in total silence and always will. Maybe your body grew in a way no one in the group has ever seen before. Maybe your mind works in a way that frightens the people around you. In a world this hard, a world where every day is a fight for food, where the group has to move, has to hunt, has to run from danger, what happens to you? The easy answer, the one we have all sort of absorbed, is brutal. Survival of the fittest. The weak don't make it. A person who can't pull their weight, who can't hunt or gather or keep up, is a burden the group can't afford. Surely in the harsh ancient world, the different ones were simply left behind to die. It is a clean, cold, logical story, and the bones tell us it is wrong. Let me tell you about a man who died around 50,000 years ago in a cave called Shanidar in what is now Iraq. He was a Neanderthal, and when we found his skeleton, it told an incredible story. This man was by any measure severely disabled. A massive injury early in life had withered his right arm, so badly that the lower part of it was gone, lost, or even amputated. He was almost certainly blind in his left eye from a crushing blow to the side of his face. He had a deformed leg and foot that would have made him limp badly with every step. He likely suffered hearing loss. He lived with pain every single day. And here is the staggering part. He lived to around 40 or 50 years old. In Neanderthal terms, that is old. This was not someone who was quietly left to die. This was a man with crippling disabilities who survived for decades. You cannot do that alone, not in that world. A one-armed, half-blind, limping man cannot hunt big game, cannot defend himself, cannot keep pace with a group on the move. For him to live as long as he did, other people had to help him. For years, for decades. They shared their food with him, they protected him. They slowed down for him. They kept him alive long past the point where he could repay them with labor. 50,000 years ago, a group of Neanderthals, the very creatures whose name we use as an insult for being dumb and brutish, looked at a man who could give them almost nothing in return and decided he was worth keeping. And he is not the only one. In France, there is another famous Neanderthal, an individual we call the Old Man of La Chapelle. By the time he died, he had lost almost all of his teeth. The sockets in his jaw had healed over and closed, which means he had been toothless for a long time before the end. He had crippling arthritis in his spine, his hips, his shoulders. He was bent, stiff, and in constant pain, and he could not have chewed tough raw meat. Someone had to prepare softer food for him, maybe even chew it for him, so that a toothless man could still eat. He too lived on, and these are not freak exceptions. Once you know what to look for, you find this everywhere in the human story. In Italy, there is the burial of a young person we call Romito II, who lived around 10,000 years ago. They had a form of dwarfism that would have left them very short, with shortened arms, unable to perform the heavy physical work their society depended on. And yet, they lived into their teens and were buried with care, held close in the grave with another person. They were not cast out. They belonged. In a watery burial ground in Florida, archaeologists found a teenage boy who had been born with spina bifida, a serious condition that would have left his lower body badly impaired, probably unable to walk normally. He lived to around 15, which means that for 15 years in a hunter-gatherer world, someone carried him, fed him, cleaned him, and cared for him. In what is now the Czech Republic at a site called Dolni Vestonice, archaeologists uncovered the grave of 3 young people buried together around 30,000 years ago, arranged with obvious ceremony and care. One of them had a skeleton marked by serious physical abnormalities. Whoever they were in life and death, they were placed at the very center of an elaborate, deliberate burial. Not discarded, but honored. There are also skulls of children born with conditions that reshaped their heads and almost certainly their minds, who survived for years. Years that were only possible because the people around them refused to give up on them. Over and over, across continents and across tens of thousands of years, we find the same quiet evidence written into old bones. Somebody was cared for. Somebody who could not survive on their own did not have to. You might wonder how we can possibly know this, and it is actually beautifully simple. Bones heal. When you break a bone and survive, the bone knits back together and it leaves a record. So when we find a skeleton with a serious injury or a disabling condition that has healed, one that shows months or years of bone growth after the moment of disaster, we know that person lived a long time after they became unable to fend for themselves. And in the harsh ancient world, surviving for years while helpless means one thing and one thing only. Someone fed you when you couldn't find food. Someone brought you water when you couldn't reach it. Someone stayed when it would have been so much easier to go. A healed bone in a person who could not have healed alone is quite literally a fossil of human kindness. So why did they do it? Why would a struggling group of ancient humans spend precious resources, food, time, safety, on a member who couldn't hunt, couldn't gather, couldn't fight? Part of it is simply that we are a deeply social species, wired for empathy. We did not survive as lone wolves. We survived as groups bound together by powerful bonds of love and loyalty and kinship. And those bonds do not have an off switch that flips the moment someone becomes inconvenient. The same feelings that make you care for your child, your parent, your friend, those are ancient, and they do not stop mattering just because times are hard. In a small band, the different one was not a statistic. They were someone's son, someone's sister, someone they had laughed with and grieved with. But there may be something even deeper going on, because being different is not the same as being useless. Take deafness, which is almost impossible to see in a skeleton, but which must have existed in every single era of human life. How do you survive in a world of spoken warnings and shouted plans if you cannot hear a single word? The answer is something our species turns out to be astonishingly good at. We gesture, we point, we mime. Long before anyone wrote a single word down, humans were communicating with their hands and their faces as much as their voices. A deaf child in an ancient band would not have been trapped in silence and isolation. The people around them would have done what humans have always done. They would have found another way to talk. Even today, wherever a community has enough deaf members, a full sign language tends to be born from scratch, invented by ordinary people who simply refuse to let someone they love be locked out of the conversation. And then there is the strangest, most invisible kind of different of all, a mind that simply works in another way. We often imagine this as pure tragedy, but consider what a small hunting band actually needs. It needs someone who can sit for hours, utterly absorbed, shaping a perfect blade while everyone else gets bored and wanders off. It needs someone who notices the one detail in the landscape that everybody else walks straight past. The faint track, the changed color of a plant, the subtle sign that danger or dinner is near. It needs someone with a memory so relentless and exact that they can hold the location of every waterhole across hundreds of miles and recite the movements of the herds going back generations. A mind that fixates, a mind that notices, a mind that remembers everything and forgets nothing. In a modern classroom, those traits might earn a label and a worried frown. In an ancient band, they might have made you the most valuable person at the fire wing, the tracker, the tool maker, the living map, the keeper of the knowledge that kept everyone else alive. Think about it. The person who couldn't run with the hunters, maybe they were the one who stayed back and became a master toolmaker whose hands knew the stone better than anyone's. The person who couldn't see might have had extraordinary hearing or an unmatched memory for the stories and songs and knowledge the group could not afford to lose. The one whose mind worked differently might have seen patterns no one else could, when the herds would move, where the water hid, what the sky was about to do. In many later cultures, the person who had visions, who had fits, who experienced the world in a way no one else did, was not shunned. They became the shaman, the seer, the holy one, the bridge to another world. Different did not mean lesser. Sometimes different meant special. And in a tiny group where everyone knows everyone, where every single person is rare and precious, you do not throw away a human being. You find the place where they fit. Now, I am not going to pretend the ancient world was a gentle paradise of perfect acceptance. It wasn't. Life was brutally hard, and there were certainly times of famine, of desperate hardship, when groups could not save everyone and terrible choices were made. There is evidence of that too. The story of the different one was not always a happy one, but that is exactly what makes the evidence we do have so powerful. Because these people had every excuse to be ruthless. Every pressure pushed toward leaving the weak behind. The cold math of survival said, abandon them. And again, they didn't. They chose the harder thing. They carried the ones who couldn't walk. They fed the ones who couldn't hunt. They made room for the ones who saw a different world. Not because it was easy, and not because it was efficient, but because somewhere deep in what makes us human is the stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to leave our people behind. So, what did ancient humans do with those who were born different? A lot of the time, far more often than we ever assumed, they kept them. They loved them. They carried them up mountains and across rivers. They sat them by the fire and listened to their songs and trusted their strange and valuable way of seeing the world. They found new ways to speak to them and new places for them to belong. They buried them with care, holding them close even in death. The blind one, the deaf one, the one whose body or mind did not match the others. They were not erased from the human story. They are written into it, in healed bone and careful graves as proof of something we do not give our ancestors nearly enough credit for. We tend to think of compassion as something modern, a luxury, something civilization invented once we got comfortable and safe. But it is the opposite. Compassion is one of the oldest things we have. It was there in a cave in Iraq 50,000 years ago, in the hands that fed a one-armed man. It was there long before cities, before writing, before farming, before history itself. You come from people who, with almost nothing, chose to care for the ones who could give nothing back. That is not a weakness in our story. That might be the whole point of it.